In the 3rd year after my death, my husband finally remembered me. The reason is that he has a recurrence of granuloid leukemia, and hematopoietic stem cells need to be transplanted again. He found the house I lived in and asked me to sign a donation agreement. But it was found that it was uninhabited for a long time. He inquired from his neighbors. The neighbor said, "You mean Keek's daughter? Died long ago." I heard that he was pulled to donate bone marrow during his illness, and he swallowed breath within a few days after he came back. He refused to believe it and felt that the neighbor colluded with me to deceive him. He said impatiently to his neighbor, "If you can see her, please tell her that if she doesn't show up within 3 days, I won't pay any more for the wild medical expenses she raises." The neighbor saw that he couldn't eat it, shook his head and left, muttering, "Poor that child, he has been starving to death long ago." 1. In the 3rd year after death, my son and I were still lonely ghosts. It's just that the bond is too deep to enter reincarnation, and her husband, Hosinian, has already crawled all the way from the bottom of the society and turned into an enviable business newcomer. I once betrayed him without hesitation when he was at his most depressed. Therefore he hates me. I can't wait to peel my skin and cramp. 3 years ago, he forced me to donate bone marrow to his little sweetheart Shin Yufei. Bone marrow puncture is invasive. I don't know if it's a mistake in the puncture operation or my low resistance to the disease. A week after bone marrow puncture, I had a serious infection all over my body, and I had a fever until I fell into a coma and died at home. My 3-year-old son finally died beside me because no one took care of him. In the past 3 years, Hosnian has never seen us in the future and has never made a phone call. At this time, I took my son Xiaoyan's little hand and watched Hosinian kick the door of the courtyard where I lived before his death in the air. After not seeing each other for 3 years, he has changed a lot, and his eyebrows are full of coldness and ruthlessness, familiar and strange. Behind him stood Shin Yufei, who was wearing a mask and dressed up. Looking at her rosy little face and well-proportioned figure, I couldn't see that she was sick at all. Xiaotian listened to the bang sound of kicking the door and hid in my arms with some fear. He raised his head, and his bright eyes were a little excited and a little afraid. "Mom, does Dad finally think of us? He hasn't come to see us for a long time, but he seems to be very angry. Did Xiaotian make him unhappy? Also, who is the aunt standing there?" I stroked his head. My heart was like a knife, and my throat wanted to be choked by something, and I couldn't say a word. "Zhouke, get out of here now. Don't pretend to be dead inside." Huasinian roared loudly at the yard. The huge movement alarmed Aunt Zhang, who lived in the next yard. Aunt Zhang walked out of the hospital and asked Huasinian, "Young man, who are you looking for? No one lives in this family for a long time." Hosinian straightened up and asked, "Didn't Zhou live here?" She moved away. Aunt Zhang's eyes darkened and she sighed. "You mean Keek's daughter? She died 3 years ago." Hosinian was stunned for a moment. Aunt Zhang continued, "I heard that he was pulled to donate bone marrow during his illness. He swallowed his breath within a few days of coming back. What a sin." Shin Yufei's expression changed and his face turned pale. She argued aggrievedly, "Auntie, don't talk nonsense. It's safe to donate bone marrow and you won't die. If she doesn't want to donate my bone marrow to me, she can tell me directly. Don't curse yourself. It's unlucky." She spoke loudly on purpose, as if I would eavesdrop in the yard. Hosinian, who was still in a dast, relaxed in an instant when he heard Aunt Zhang's words. A mocking smile appeared on his face. Is it interesting for her to act all day long? It's more credible to make up lies. I want her to check if there are any cases of death due to bone marrow donation. Aunt Zhang didn't understand what they were talking about. He only repeated, "The poor thing died in the house for several days before he was found." Hosinian's face was frosty and said to Aunt Zhang, "I don't know why you joined forces with her to deceive me, but I ask you to tell her that if she doesn't show up to donate bone marrow to Feifei within 3 days, don't blame me for cutting the uremia dialysis treatment fee of the wild species she raised." Aunt Zhang was dumbfounded. Then he shook his head and sighed to prepare to go back to his yard. Hosnian warned coldly behind her, "Remember, I only gave her 3 days. If she didn't show up, I wouldn't transfer a penny of this month's living expenses to her, so let her watch the wild seed she raised die in front of her." Aunt Zhang, who turned her back, blushed. She muttered, "Poor that child, he has been starving to death for a long time. If I could go over and have a look, I may be able to save the child's life." Point 2. Brother Sinian, is it because Sister Coco doesn't want to donate bone marrow to me so she hides? Shin Yufei's expression was about to cry. Hosnian rubbed her hair spoiledly. "Fool, it's just a small leukemia. Even if Zhou doesn't donate bone marrow, I will give you a type all over the country until I find a suitable one for you." Shin Yufei pouted and said, "However, there is almost no rejection reaction to Sister Coco's bone marrow. The doctor said that he had never seen 2 people with such a high matching bone marrow." Huasinian glanced at the locked door with a firm and promising tone. "Then for you I will definitely find her even if I dig 3 feet in the ground." At this moment my heart still inevitably has a burst of pain. Looking at the 2 people standing in front of me, the memory of many years ago floated in front of me. Huasinian and I were college classmates. At that time he was like the sun shining through the mist in the morning, warm and dazzling. It's my heart that moves first. After graduating from college we got together. I once regarded him as my salvation, and my heart and eyes were full of him. I followed him to start a business and suffer together. He promised to take good care of me for the rest of my life. At the beginning he did this. But ideals can't compete with reality after all. In the early days of his business I often followed him to talk about business. It was also at that time that I met Lu Jianqing, the son of Huyao Group. Lu Jianqing is a second-generation ancestor, and his work is just to experience life. Since he saw me he has always surrounded me like a fly, and even touched me while drinking. Finally, when Lu Jianqing wanted to hold me in his arms with the strength of wine, Ho Xinian directly picked up the wine bottle on the table and smashed it on his head. Because of this matter, we not only lost Huayao's order, but also lost all our savings to get Lu Jianqing not to send Ho Xinian to prison. Of course what we actually pay is far more than that. That night, he took me in his arms and apologized to me. He said that he was sorry for me, that he would succeed one day, and he would never let anyone bully me. Indeed, no one else bullied me after his success. He is the only one. I don't want to remember anymore. I looked at the face that I hadn't seen for many years but became more cold and ruthless. The sultry summer wind messed up his hair and deepened his frowning eyebrows. It makes him look full of troubles. He held Shen Yufei in his arms, and his eyes fell on the half-foot-high weed at the gate of the courtyard. 3. The year I betrayed Hosen was the second year of our marriage. At that time I was more than a month pregnant. It's just that he and I don't know about it yet. At that time the business run by Hosnian had improved and attracted a number of investments. It should have developed steadily, but for some reason it suddenly encountered Waterloo, and even all the negotiated investments were withdrawn. The capital chain is broken, and the products have problems one after another. Bank loans are cut off, and mortgaged real estate, cars and factories will be auctioned by banks. In those days Hos couldn't eat and sleep at night. The disaster did not happen alone. Hosnian's mother was diagnosed with cancer that year, and needed a huge amount of treatment. I asked someone to help me investigate the reason, and then found that the person behind the stumbling block to Hosnian's company was actually Lu Jianqing, who had been smashed in the head by him with a wine bottle. And at this time he also came to me. He said that he could ask the investment company under Huyao Group to inject capital into Hosnian, and he could also pay for the treatment of Hosnian's mother. I know he must have the conditions. Will Satan kindly do charity? If he doesn't want to die, he will definitely take something more important than his life. I asked him what it meant to do this. Lu Jianqing looked contemptuous. If you want to do it, you can do it. What's the point? I just like to look at you ants, extremely angry and helpless. Besso, I haven't avenged him for smashing my head to the bloodshed, and now it's time for him to repay. I don't understand Lu Jianqing. He had 100 ways to make Haas live a hard time, but he chose me. After many years I still remember the scene of that day clearly. In the dimly lit box Lu Jianqing hugged me and sat on his lap. Holding the contract in his hand, Hosnian, who pushed the door in, froze in place after seeing me clearly. With red eyes and a hoarse voice he questioned me. Why? I told him. You can't give me the life I want, but brother Lu can. Lu Jianqing laughed. The greasy hand twisted on my waist. I was like thousands of arrows piercing my heart, and I was humiliated, but I still dodged with a smile against the man's strength. Hosnian, isn't this good? I'll help you get the resources, and you sign a contract with Huyao for mutual benefit. The bottom of Ho Xinian's eyes was little by little disappointed, but he still firmly reached out to me. Coco, come here. I don't need you to do such a thing. I will give you the life you want in the future. His tone was pleading, and his expression was so sad. At that moment my heart wanted to be crushed back and forth by 1,000 pounds of heavy stones, and I could hardly breathe. He said, Coco, I can go home with me without signing today's order. He used to be so confident and arrogant, who was so arrogant that he could shake a wine bottle to the head of the brilliant prince without hesitation, but now he is begging humbly. Lu Jianqing smiled wildly and freely. Hosnian, the woman you like is just like that. I hooked my finger and she climbed onto my bed. So, what was the meaning of smashing my wine bottle at the beginning? Ha ha ha. Ho Xinian ignored his words and just looked at me. I climbed up Lu Jianqing's neck with a smile and smiled at him. Yes, Snan, be open-minded and don't be too serious. I don't really remember what happened later that night. I only remember that he signed the contract and said to me with scarlet eyes, Zhouku, we will never die in this life. Later he went crazy and made a career. In just a few years, he has developed from a startup company to a listed company, and even became one of the leading enterprises in the previous year. He succeeded, and I became the biggest stain in his life. 3. Of course I didn't show up for the 3-day deadline he gave. Hosnian came to the door of my small courtyard again. The son turned around his father excitedly and put his transparent little hand into Ho Xinian's big hand hanging on his side. He turned around and shouted at me. Mom, I finally held hands with Dad. My eyes were sour, and I pulled the corners of my mouth hard and smiled at him. Over the years, Ho Xinian has always thought that his son was Lu Jianqing's. He hated him so much that he didn't even want to give him a look. Although I did a paternity test, the results showed that they were biological paternity. But he still didn't want to believe it, thinking that I paid for the report. Since that night, I have lost all my trust in Hosnian. I proposed to him for divorce. I also want to end this sick relationship. But he just stared at me viciously. Joku, I want you to remember that you owe me all your life. I said we would never die. Divorce? Don't think about it. He took countless female companions home to spend the night and make out in front of me. That as long as I quarrel, he makes me think about how dirty I was when I rolled with Lu Jianxing. This situation lasted until Shen Yufei returned to China. Since Shen Yufei returned to him, he cut off all contact with the previous women. The two of them openly went against each other. Even Hosnian's business partners called Shen Yufei Hof people. Thoughts were pulled back. I watched Hosnian stand at the door and call me. A mechanical and electronic sound came from the other end of the phone, prompting him that his number was empty. He frowned and opened my WeChat. The message on it was sent to me 3 days ago, urging me to show up for Shen Yufei as soon as possible. Of course I didn't reply. He clicked on my moments. When he saw the photo I sent 4 years ago, he paused for a moment. That's a picture I took secretly. He was sitting on the sofa, and his 2-year-old son holding his arm and leaning his cute little head on his shoulder. At that time I thought it was beautiful and took a picture. But the next second he pushed his son away in disgust. He clicked on the enlarged photo of his avatar and looked at it for a while, and then returned to the dialog box to send me a message. Joku, this is your own problem. The 3-day deadline has come. From today on, I won't transfer you a penny for living expenses. He waited for a long time and still no one replied, so he raised his foot and kicked the door fiercely. Xiaotian, who had been happily leading Huasinian around, trembled with fear of Huasinian's action. He flattened his mouth and ran into my arms crying, "Mom, what's wrong with Dad all of a sudden? I'm afraid." I hugged him in my arms and comforted him. "Don't be afraid, Dad can't hurt you anymore. Look, there is a butterfly over there. Would you like to fly over and play with the butterfly for a while?" I diverted his attention. Xiaotian turned his head and saw several butterflies flying. He burst into tears and laughed, quickly wiped his tears and flew to the butterfly. After 2 kicks, Hosnian became more irritable. He kept rubbing his temples and then took out his phone and dialed it out. "Hey, is this the unlocking company?" For half an hour later, Hosnian pushed open the door that had a spider web. The grass in the yard is deeper than the door, and it has reached the waist of Hosnian. Obviously, this place has been abandoned for a long time. He stood in the yard and didn't want to go forward again. He has been here twice. He should remember that I take good care of the yard, not what it looks like in front of me. The first time I came here was to send me and my son. At that time, my 2-year-old son had just been diagnosed with uremia, which was caused by congenital kidney dysplasia. He disliked his son's bad luck, so he bought this farmyard in a remote town and asked my son and I to move here. He transferred 20,000 yuan to me for living expenses every month, including the treatment of my son's dialysis. The second time he came to this small courtyard, he forcibly took me to give his white moonlight Shen Yufei a bone marrow matching. If he still remembers, he will definitely remember that the courtyard is full of hydrangeas and roses. I also made a swing stand for my son. While he was still in a daze, Shen Yufei's phone call came in again. Her voice was a little weak. "Brother Snan, have you seen Sister Kiki? Will she come to match me today?" Ho Sinian comforted her. "I will solve this matter. Please cooperate with the doctor's treatment." "Don't worry." Shen Yufei choked and said, "I know that Sister Coco is definitely unwilling to donate bone marrow to me again. I can understand that she has saved me once. I can't be greedy to let her save me again. She is hiding now. I don't blame her really. It seems that I deliberately hid because I didn't want to donate my bone marrow to her." Hosnian was silent for a few seconds. Out of me unexpectedly, he didn't stand on Shen Yufei's side. He said, "It's not like that. I haven't contacted her yet. She probably doesn't know about your relapse of leukemia. How could she hide in advance?" Shen Yufei was choked. Quickly explained, "Snango, you misunderstood. I didn't mean that." Huasinian interrupted her. "Feifei, don't worry. As long as Joku is still alive in this world, I will definitely find her. Even if she dies, I will ask her to donate her bone marrow to you before dying." Shen Yufei breathed a sigh of relief after hearing it. Hanging up the phone, Huasinian stood in front of the door for a long time. Although the door was not locked, he still did not push it open. If he opens it, he can see the 2 bodies outlined with white chalk. That was painted by the police after my son and I died. But he just stood there. Finally, he left the yard again and bought a new lock from the unlocking company to lock the door. Point 5. I found a strange phenomenon. As long as we follow Hosnian, we can leave the place where we have been bound. My son has been tired of being here for 3 years. I'm going to take him out for a walk. He was so excited that he couldn't help looking around and kept making all kinds of exclamations in his mouth. But it seems that we can't leave him too far away. We followed Hosnian back to his villa. The son looked at the luxuriously decorated villa, and was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth. He also lived here before he was 2 years old. Maybe after many years he has already forgotten. He flew around to see, and I followed Hwasinian to his study. I watched him call the bank and freeze the secondary card he gave me. In fact, if he is more careful, he will find that he has not received any consumption information for 3 years. In the past 3 years, he has not touched a penny of the money transferred to the subsidiary card. He thought that after freezing the bank card, I would definitely show up in less than a week. After all, my son's uremia needs to be dialyzed all the time before the kidney replacement. Twice a week I can't live without money. After doing all this, he opened the photo album of his mobile phone to see the god. I floated behind him and found that what he was looking at was actually the photo I sent on WeChat. A group photo of him and his son. The faces of 2 people, one big and one small, are like a copy, with a wide forehead, thick eyelashes, slightly raised corners of the eyes, and the same eyebrows, all of which tell the wonder of blood. He is not a fool. It can be seen naturally. A ringing phone broke the silence in the study. It was a call from the hospital. Shin Yufei suddenly fell into a coma in the hospital. 6. Hosnian grabbed the car key and rushed out. My son and I were forced to follow him to the hospital. Possible running in such a hurry, Hosnian bumped into a man in a high-class suit in the hospital hall. The man I know is Lu Jianxing. Lu Jianxing was hit and took 2 steps back. When he stood firmly and saw that it was the year of Haas, he showed a surprised expression. Yo, isn't this Mr. Hua, our newcomer in Nanxing? Why did he come to the hospital in the middle of the night and ran in such a hurry? Hosnian hurriedly said sorry and walked straight around him to the elevator. Lu Jianxing was unforgiving and quickly followed him all the way to the inpatient department of the hematology department. Shen Yufei was not in the ward, and Hwasinian rushed to the office of her attending doctor. After learning that she was in the observation room now, not in a coma, but because of anemia and dizziness, Hwasinian completely breathed a sigh of relief. He sat panting on the companion chair in Shen Yufei's ward, looking blankly at the ground. It can be seen that he is really nervous about Shen Yufei. Lu Jianxing leaned against the door of the ward and asked with interest, "How do I remember that your little Qingmei has recovered from her illness? Why did you come in again?" Hosnian didn't want to talk more, and only replied lightly, "It's relapsed." In recent years, he and Huyao have been in business cooperation, and there are more and more orders for cooperation. 3 years ago, Lu Jianxing was forced to go abroad by his father, and the company's business was handed over to other people in charge of the company. If there is no Lu Jianxing as a demon, Hwasinian will be even more prosperous. So whose life are you going to exchange this time? Lu Jianxing suddenly asked. Hosnian glanced at him as if he was looking at a fool. I don't understand what you are saying. Lu Jianxing looked at his expression, with a strange smile on his lips. You are really good at pretending. Sometimes I can't tell whether you are real or not. Hwasinian had lost his patience and he said in a low voice, Lu Dashao, if you have anything, you might as well say it directly. It's not like your style of doing things. Lu Jianxing said. I mean, isn't Zhou already dead? Whose bone marrow are you going to use to save your little Qingmei this time? 7. It's dead quiet around. If you ignore the sound of Xiaotian playing with the little soul you just met. I looked at Hwasinian quietly. I want to know what kind of expression he will have when he hears the news of my death from others again. However, just like the last time he heard Aunt Zhang say that I was dead, he frowned at first, and then pulled the corners of his mouth and laughed. I didn't expect that Lu Dashao still cared so much about my wife. I don't know whether she is dead or alive, but you know that she is dead. Why did she tell you in person? Or have you been living in my eyes for the past few years? Is it so exciting to play like this? Haha, I don't care. She is so dirty that I don't even want to touch her. If you want to play, just take her to play. Something in my heart is completely broken. My eyes were sour and uncomfortable, probably because I wanted to shed tears. But I'm just a transparent soul now. How can I have tears? But why does the soul hurt so much? Lu Jianxing was stunned for a long time, probably not expecting that Hwasinian could say such words. He suddenly shouted angrily, Zhou, she is your wife, and you don't care about her at all? Hwasinian's expression was indifferent, avoiding Lu Jianxing's fierce gaze. I don't care about her, and I don't want you to worry about Lu Dashao. Lu Jianxing laughed out loud. Stupid. She is simply a fool for people like you. If I had known this, I would have really wanted her, so at least she could have survived. Lu Jianxing smiled and stood up straight. Hosnian, you are still the cruelest. I have to accept this. He waved his hand to Hwasinian. Let's go. I'm really afraid that I'll be eaten without any scum to do business with a heartless person like you. Lu Jianxing left Shen Yufei's ward. He walked to the place where my soul was floating. As if he saw me, he suddenly looked up and said with a smile, Look, stupid woman, this is the man you were going to protect at the beginning. If you follow me, where are these things? After saying that, he waved his hand and left. I looked at his back, angry and ridiculous. He is also one of the pushers who caused my tragedy, but so far, he is the only one who regrets my sincerity. After Lu Jianxing left, Hosinian stared at the doorframe he had just leaned against, and his face became more and more gloomy. His hand was holding on to the mobile phone, and he didn't relax until his joint turned white. For a long time he stood up irritably, paced back and forth and then sat down again. Repeatedly he suddenly threw the mobile phone in his hand to the ground. Fuck! It's just a psychopath. 8. At about 10 o'clock in the evening, Shin Yufei returned to the general ward from the observation room. She was stunned when she saw the mobile phone broken on the ground. She grabbed Hosinian's hand nervously and asked, "Brother Sinian, what's wrong? Did something happen?" Hosinian's body suddenly trembled, and his empty eyes gradually focused on Shin Yufei's beautiful face. After looking at it for a long time, Shin Yufei's face was hot. He held Shin Yufei tightly in his arms, put his chin against her shoulder, and closed his eyes in pain. Shin Yufei was a little uneasy, but he didn't know what to say. Until Hosinian let go of his arms and coaxed her to lie on the hospital bed. Shin Yufei took Hosinian's hand and said, "Brother Xinyan, I always feel that you are not in a good condition recently. If you don't want to find a private detective to investigate the matter of Sister Kiki, I want you to stay in the hospital to accompany me. I don't know why, I always feel very flustered when I'm sick this time." Hosinian touched her little face full of heartache. "Okay, I'll stay with you. I just want her to donate her bone marrow to you quickly." Shin Yufei's eyes were full of emotion. "Brother Xinyan, you promised me that you would divorce her and marry me." Hosinian's eyes were distracted for a moment, and then he lowered his head and kissed her forehead. He said guiltily, "I have wronged you over the years. I have decided to let her and myself go. After I find her, I will divorce her, and then we will start a new life." Shin Yufei put his hand around Hosinian's neck, and his eyes couldn't tell whether it was mockery or sarcasm. She said softly, "Brother Xinyan, I've been willing to do all these years and I'm not wronged." 9. After Hosinian stopped the secondary card, he did not wait for my begging for mercy, but waited for the news of the private detective's investigation. The private detective sent a lot of content, several of which were news screenshots of the local official account. Surprised. The mother and son died at home many days later and were discovered by their neighbors. The news is not very long. Although there is no detailed name of the village, the name of the town is written. The matching photo is also the small courtyard where I live. Us must know each other. He stared at the content of the screenshot, and his whole body froze in place. But he still doesn't want to believe it. He took out his mobile phone and called me, but the number was still empty. He tried his best to call my WeChat voice again, but no one answered. Suddenly he seemed to think of something. Open the application of the banking software on the mobile phone. He clicked on the secondary card account management. When he saw the balance in the bank card and the bank account for nearly 6 months, his whole body trembled. Because I haven't spent a penny for nearly half a year. And from the balance of his secondary card, I haven't spent the money on the card for about 3 years. The private detective sent 2 voice messages. "Mr. Hua, after 2 days of investigation we confirmed that Ms. Zhou Ku, whom you asked us to investigate, is dead, and her child is also dead. The local villagers are basically aware of this matter. The cremation was handled by the village committee, and the ashes are still stored in the funeral home. I also went to the village committee specially. The staff there said that they had contacted Ms. Zhou Ku's husband, but no one answered the phone, and the message was sent." Hosinian was a little out of control. He asked tremblingly, "How could they die suddenly? How can a good person die at home without anyone knowing?" The private detective also couldn't bear it and sighed. "It's been a long time, and a lot of Ms. Zhou Ku's information can't be found. I heard from the village committee that it seems to be a systemic infection caused by donating bone marrow. As for the child, he basically starved to death. He stayed with his mother's body for several days, which was really miserable." Hosnian's pupils shrank, and the mobile phone in his hand slipped to the ground. He muttered, "How is it possible? How could it be like this? My son's soul has fallen asleep in my arms. There is no need to watch this cruel scene. How could it be like this? I also want to ask. After I died, I watched my son beside me anxiously and called my mother again and again, and took my hand to wake me up. He also watched him pour water because of thirst, but accidentally spilled hot water and scalded himself. He was so scared that he cried. My soul is in a hurry, but I can't help it. Finally, he nestled in my cold arms and cried for his mother to sleep. 3 days later, he lay weakly in my arms and swallowed. In the days before his son's death, he took my mobile phone and made so many calls to Hosinian until his mobile phone ran out of power. He didn't answer anything. If he has been in the middle even once, his son will survive. That's also his son, his own son. Although he doesn't admit it. After my son died, I hugged the little one in the empty space. He didn't know that he was dead yet. He just lay on my shoulder happily. Mom, why did I call you these days? You ignored me. I thought you were dead. I was so scared. The soul has no tears but endless sadness. I wanted to take him into reincarnation as soon as possible, but the bond was too deep, and my soul had been bound in the world and could not leave. Our mother and son were bound to this prison-like place for 3 years. 10. Hosnian collapsed on the sofa, shaking his head and repeating, "No way, I haven't forgiven her yet. How can she die?" I burst into tears with laughter. It turns out that the reason why I can't die is that he hasn't forgiven me yet. He picked up his mobile phone on the ground and opened the album again to see the only photo of him and his son. Looking at it, his shoulders began to tremble, and 2 watermarks fell on the screen of his mobile phone. He got up suddenly and almost rushed out of his villa. His hands were shaking while driving. His car was parked next to the courtyard where my son and I lived again. In just a few days, more than he has had in the past few years. I don't know whether to cry or laugh. This time, after opening the door, he went straight to the door of the house. After standing outside the door for more than 10 seconds, he pushed open the door that had been closed for 3 years. With a squeak, the sultry roll came to the face with the smell of moisture and mold. The room is still as tidy as when I died, except for the mess on the table and coffee table. That was done by my son's mischiefs in the days after my death. The living room is located on the inner side, and a large and small human figure is drawn with white chalk. The older one is me, and the youngest one is my son. I fell unconscious when I returned to the bedroom after going to the bathroom, and my son died quietly in my arms. Hosnian stared at the 2 people with a gloomy face. His body began to tremble, and his expression began to crack. The crack is getting bigger and bigger until it is on the verge of collapse. He moved his steps and began to look at room by room, first in his son's room, where there was a pig doll brought casually at the annual meeting of Hosnian Company, which was the only gift he gave to his son. At the head of the bed is the photo of my son and Hosnian that I secretly took. There is also a painting of my son. There are 3 people in the painting, which are his father, mother and himself. Hosnian held the painting in his hand, and tears dripped on it. He quickly took out a tissue and carefully wiped the tears on it dry, and carefully put them back in place. Next door is my room. It's very simple with only a few clothes and some books. He took off his clothes from my closet and rubbed them in his arms. He looked at those clothes for a long time. Most of the time he helped me choose before we had a gap. His expression was sad, and there was a very small sob in his throat. He squatted down weakly, buried his head in his clothes and cried bitterly. 11. He stayed in the room until the evening. I haven't paid the electricity bill for 3 years, and the electricity here has been cut off. It was dark at night, and the grass in the yard was half a man's height. Especially in this room my son and I died. Although I am a soul, I also feel a little gloomy. Hosnian didn't feel any horror at all and sat on my bed like a piece of wood. The sudden ringing of the phone scared me. I went over and took a look at the caller ID, and it turned out to be Lu Jianqing. This ghost does not disperse. Hosnian slid to answer the answer, but he was silent for a long time. Lu Jianqing said, "I think it's still necessary to make things clear to you. I don't want a stupid woman like her, who still has a stigma after death." He paused for a few seconds and continued. "At the beginning, I just wanted to avenge you for smashing my wine bottle. I threatened her with your future, and she agreed. I thought that if she was willing to follow me, I might as well take care of her and your children in her belly, but she is a lover. She doesn't like me, and I have no intention of taking my wife. In case she stabs me while I'm asleep one day, it's not cost-effective. Watching you torture her in the past few years, I thought she would come back to me, but I didn't expect that she died to donate bone marrow to your lover. Do you think it's funny? What are you? Are you a human or not? When I came back from abroad, I heard that she had been dead for 3 years. You dog X." Lu Jianqing on the other end of the phone suddenly lost control of his emotions. I really can't understand this second ancestor. The phone was hung up by Hosnian, which prevented Lu Jianqing's crazy curse from entering my ears. I don't want to watch Hosnian's painful performance anymore. I thought he would be very happy when he learned the news of my death, but I can't make waves anymore. I floated out of the yard and found my sleeping son on the big branch not far away. My transparent body surrounded him in my arms and kissed his sleeping little face over and over again. In the past 2 days, I obviously feel that my soul is much lighter. Probably the bond is decreasing little by little. Maybe soon, my son and I can enter reincarnation and forget the pain of this life. 12. That night, Hosnian didn't leave. He slept in the room where my son and I used to sleep. I don't know what he is thinking. In the past, we didn't listen to our mother and son. Now who will show this affection to? Early the next morning, Hosnian drove to the town and bought some agricultural tools such as sickles. After returning home, he rolled up his sleeves and began to clean up the weeds in the courtyard. July is the extreme heat. The sun is shining brightly, and there is no wind. But he only buried his head in cutting the weeds in the yard and trimmed the roses and hydrangeas that had grown wildly one by one, as if he could not feel the high temperature of nearly 40 degrees at all. When he is thirsty, he drinks mineral water, and when he is hungry, he eats the dry bread bought in the town. He carefully wiped the room that had not been cleaned for 3 years with a rag, leaving only me and my son's white figure. Sometimes he lies beside us and stretches out his arms to pretend to put me and my son in his arms. I watched his performance quietly and felt that his body was getting lighter and lighter. I seem to have figured out why I can't leave for a long time. It's about that the resentment between me and Hosnian is too deep. If we can put it down completely, we can also enter reincarnation. These days my son is the happiest. He thought that his father was going to move in with us. When he was working in the year of hose, he kept walking around his father for a moment. My son's bondage is almost freed. He should be ahead of me. He wants to be closer to Hosnian now, and I won't stop him. Hosnian is very strange. He doesn't pay the charging fee on such a hot day. Lying in a dark room every night like a sauna. In the middle of the night, he sometimes cries and sometimes laughs. Like a madman. He cleaned up the yard in the room, and even Aunt Zhang next door couldn't help but be curious. While he was distracted at the door, he asked, "Are you going to sell the house? But yours is a fierce house, but it's not easy to sell." Hosnian ignored her, turned around and returned to the yard and slammed the door. He hid in the courtyard for the 7th day. Xin Yufei came to find it. She looked at the well-groomed courtyard and was a little shocked. She said angrily to Hosnian, "You didn't answer your call these days. You didn't answer. Are you here to clean up the yard for her?" Hosnian didn't answer him, but just did his work quietly. Xin Yufei rushed forward, snatched the flower shovel from Hosnian's hand and threw it on the ground. "Hosnian, what on earth do you mean? You make fun of me. Now you and your husband are going to make up, so what am I?" Hosnian stood up slowly, looked at her carelessly and said, "I can't make up with her." Xin Yufei was stunned. "Then what are you doing here?" "The doctor said that I have acute myeloid leukemia and need a bone marrow transplant as soon as possible. You advise Kiki that if she wants money I can give it to her as much as you want." Hosnian sneered. "If you want it so much, go to the underworld to find her." Xin Yufei took a step back in shock. "You? What do you mean?" Hosnian smiled gloomily. "What do you mean? Don't you know what it means? 3 years ago you said that you were dying and were in a hurry to have a bone marrow transplant. At that time Zhouku was sick. Why did the doctor you found say that it would not affect her body?" Xin Yufei froze. "You know that if your body has poor resistance, transplanting bone marrow may cause various complications, but you still urged me to do so. Zhouku died a week after donating bone marrow to you, because of a systemic infection. Are you satisfied now?" Hosnian was a little hysterical, as if his anger had finally found a gap to vent. Xin Yufei's eyes were flustered and she anxiously denied. "How come?" "The doctor obviously said that she was in good health, so he let her go home from the hospital." Hosnian suddenly stepped forward and strangled Xin Yufei's neck. "It's all you. If it weren't for you, Zhouku wouldn't have died. This is your retribution. You deserve to have relapsed leukemia again. No one can save you this time." Xin Yufei looked straight into Hosnian's eyes and sneered. "Haha, don't show affection for me here. Who asked Zhouku to make the matching for me? It's you. Although I urged the bone marrow transplant, who forcibly brought her sick here? It's you too. Over the years, if it hadn't been for your use, do you think I would have followed you? Only a stupid woman like Zhouku will love you wholeheartedly." Hosnian's eyes were about to crack, and the force he strangled Xin Yufei's neck was a little heavier. Xin Yufei's face turned blue and purple, and her struggling hands also drooped. At the last moment, Hosnian still let go of his hand. Xin Yufei coughed loudly and collapsed to the ground. Hosnian looked at her coldly. "I won't kill you. It will dirty my hands. I will make you suffer from leukemia and die. This is your destination." 13. Xin Yufei left with a pale face. She also looked like crazy, crying and laughing. Hosnian returned to the house and carefully wiped the urn of me and my son. I forgot to mention that he went to the funeral home a few days ago to get the ashes of me and my son. A thick layer of ash has fallen on the urn, and Hosnian cleaned up the urn little by little with a rag. I can't catch my son these days. He can completely break free from the bondage and fly to where he can fly. And I'm still trapped around Hosnian. I know it's time to say goodbye to my son. At night, I held my son in my arms who had been playing all day. I told him a story of the afterlife. In that world we are no longer transparent souls floating in the sky. We can taste all kinds of delicious food, play happy games with children, and ordinary people who can go to school. The son's eyes lit up when he heard it. He said, "Mom, I'll wait for you in the afterlife first." I held him tightly in my arms. "Ori, Mom will definitely come to you." The next day, I gave him to the official who sent his soul into reincarnation. He took the official's hand and kept turning around and saying goodbye to me. I sent him away until he disappeared. It's like my heart has been hollowed out, and nothing can arouse my interest. I followed Hosnian's side numbly and watched him repeat those things every day. He went to the mausoleum and chose 3 cemeteries next to each other. The location is not bad. At the top of the mountain you can overlook the whole city. He buried the ashes of me and my son. Then he muttered to himself, "Kiki, I still love you the most for so many years. The women I brought home before are just angry with you. Xin Yufei and I have nothing to do. It's just that I'm tired of those women who play tricks outside. It's good to leave her alone by my side to make you angry. I hate that you betrayed me that day, so I tried my best to make money, but why did I lose you when I made money?" His face was full of tears. 14. He sold the company to Huyao Group. Lu Zhenqing took over and suppressed the price severely, but Hosnian did not bargain and signed the transfer contract directly. After that, he donated all the property under his name to charity. When doing these things, Xin Yufei had been in a deep coma twice due to leukemia, but there was still no suitable type. Probably this time the fate is also over, and she seems to have seen everything for a long time. When she woke up, she was happy to watch dramas and chat with her friends. When she needed to clean her wounds, she just bit the towel tightly in her mouth without saying a word. After Hosinian dealt with everything, he went to the funeral home to entrust his own affairs. He edited the time text message and asked the funeral home to collect his body. He drew his own human figure next to my son's human figure portrait, and then lay down. He took 2 bottles of sleeping pills bought from the black market, and then stretched out his hand to hold me and my son in his arms. Kiki Xiaotian, I'm here. Our family is reunited. The moment his soul left the body, I felt that my body was easier than ever before. Turns out that this is what it feels like when a careless person dies. I flew to the place of reincarnation. Hosinian's surprised voice came behind him. Coco, don't go, wait for me. But I only flew to the place of light. I will never look back at him again.